Some people have asked me, and I myself have wondered, how I evaluate the quality of a movie. I think a movie is good when I like it. Cinema has no inexorable standards of quality, and it would be pointless to talk about a well-made film, because it would end up being a completely personal judgment. This is natural. Even some of the so-called masterpieces have detractors, precisely because they reflect an individual truth.
Funny, in which case you don't take advantage of your stars, or it isn't funny, in which case it shouldn't have so much campy and adolescent dialogue along with the really powerful sexual scenes. Sure, the movie's well made, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it.
Well, I liked it.
It's impossible for everyone to connect on the same way with a piece of art. So what I'm going to talk about is only based on my own sensitivity and in no way is intransigent. Much on the contrary, my perception on a good film changes all the time. In the first place, I can say art is timeless. All works of art must keep their emotional strength through the centuries. That's why we can continue admiring La Pietà by Michelangelo, to be wondered with the Divine Comedy, or in cinema itself, watch La Passion de Jeanne d'Arc by Carl Dreyer and cry along Maria Falconetti, even when the film was made almost 100 years ago. Technological or stylistic innovations have nothing to do to evaluate the quality of a piece. In that case, we could say Edvard Munch, who was an expressionist, was a better painter than Bouguereau. Or we could say Avatar is a better film than Persona, God forbid, only because the former was filmed with big budget and advanced special effects. A work of art must be felt and appreciated in an autonomous way, without taking into account its context of creation. As a matter of fact, I believe a good film humbly hides its creative origins and speaks by itself. A good film exploits the possibilities of the cinematic medium to communicate its ideas. Even though I think a great artist must feed from all arts to consolidate his creation, cinema mustn't look like anything but cinema. Comes to mind, for instance, the movie Dogville by Lars von Trier. I think it's a terrible example of a film, not because of the content, but because of form. It could easily have been a play. What was the purpose of taking the idea to the big screen? I don't think a single decision in the film is justified. I find the same conflict with Quentin Tarantino's movies. I really enjoy his cleverness at writing dialogues, but his productions aren't very cinematic. They work best on paper and have no reason to exist in a movie. This shows that you can be an excellent writer but a poor filmmaker. Same thing happens to Richard Linklater with his Before trilogy, where we only see the characters walking and talking for hours. Here intervenes the dissonance between cinema and literature. If you write a screenplay of literary nuances, it's better not to turn it into a picture, unless its elements are modified. We must remember that screenplays only exist with the purpose of being turned into a movie. Otherwise, it's absurd. Recently, many film productions have been trying to look more like video games. I think of the awful Ready Player One by Steven Spielberg, and I'm appalled to think it's considered as cinema. Heck, I'd rather turn on the console and get to play myself. That doesn't mean that every movie with strokes of other media is automatically bad. I really like the Dawn of the Dead remake, though it looks like a video game, and Mad Max Fury Road is very entertaining despite its comic book aesthetic. But they aren't good films. A movie must be an independent entity from its author. There are many filmmakers that enjoy presenting their thoughts in a very evident way in their work. Suddenly, the actors become an imitation of the director, like a cartoon, and everything feels fake and pretentious. I frankly can't stand some Jean-Luc Godard movies for this very same reason. When I watch À bout de souffle, I can't help to think in how ridiculously obvious the psychology of its characters is, and thus their authors, simply because they won't stop speaking. As I said, to me cinema must show an internal truth. Sometimes a close-up says a lot more than 30 minutes of wordiness. Ideological imposition, especially when verbal, shouldn't have any place in art. I prefer the ambiguity of images. The subtlety of ideas in a film is stronger when the viewer participates in them, when he completes them with his own experience. An expert in this matter is Ingmar Bergman. His characters just exist. Their biggest fears and worries are expressed through gestures, actions, and even the environment. The viewer then joins the pieces, not by intellect but by sensibility, and creates a more faithful image of truth. Art shouldn't be boring. With regard to cinema, I've heard comments like, it was a bit boring, but I know it's a good film. I don't get it. I can only think some minds are already closed by the idea that a film is a classic or a masterpiece and they are too ashamed to admit they couldn't enjoy it. As a consequence, there is an agreement that certain pieces are untouchable and anyone who expresses their disagreement is uncultured, a Philistine. This way, the possibility of amplifying our individual experience with a movie is lost. When the perception of any work is reduced to a single perspective, it stops being valuable as art. One should be able to say he didn't find anything interesting in an Eisenstein film without feeling guilty, even though his work is considered as a pillar of cinematography. For me, Ivan the Terrible was unbearable and, thus, not a good film. By this, I don't mean all movies should be filled with explosions, gunshots and car chases. Not all entertainment is art, but all art should be entertaining. I can take as an example Hungarian director Béla Tarr. His last film, The Turin Horse, is extremely slow and coarse, but I wasn't bored for a second. I always find something poetic and meaningful in its images. Even in its repetitions, which are a lot, I end up finding something new and striking. A piece of art can be scary, uncomfortable, repulsive, but never boring. Here we can clearly separate cinema as art and industry. Truth be told, the fact there are still so many paths to be explored in film creation and appreciation arises from this problem. Cinema is perhaps the most globally exposed art, and nevertheless, companies have realized it's not worth it to produce films with purely artistic intentions. No, it's easier to reuse familiar concepts with which the masses feel more comfortable. The distinction is evident. Art cannot be made with any extrinsic motivation. Given that art is born from spiritual restlessness for sharing and communicating, anything that serves other purposes, especially commercial purposes, has no right to be called art. Of course, art can be commercialized. After all, making a movie costs money and it's convenient to make up for it. But the essence of art is not but to create an intimate connection with the audience through the authentic expression of truth. Everything else is collateral.